Today, I would like to start with that I believe that we are all intuitive beings as humans, but the way we relate to it, the way we have access to it, that can change per person. Because think about it like this. Person A buys a computer and person B buys the exact same computer. Person A is very much trained into computer skills and person B isn't. So the way that person A is working with the computer from day one, he or she is very skilled into using the computer, while person B is still figuring it out. And while he bought the same computer, the same access, he doesn't have the same training, and so he doesn't fully trust himself to use the same computer in the same way. So they both have access to the same computer, but they do not have access to the same result from it, at least not in that moment. And the same counts for intuition. It's the combination of human consciousness and the body and how we utilize it. We have the same possibility, but we are utilizing it in a different way. And does that mean that I think that everyone has the exact same intuitive skills? No. Just like not everyone has the exact same computer skills. But with the expansion of consciousness and tuning in and merging in to our own body, then yes. And one of the most frequent questions that I get working with people is how we can unlock our spiritual gifts, how we can become more intuitive or evolve spiritually, and how to really activate our intuition. And regardless of which tool I'm using, either astrology, the Akashic record, light language, usually it comes down to the same core. And in this video, I'm going to explain the 3 different phases that are leading to the same core. And then by the end of this video, we will really dive into that core and how to transmute it. So let's start with number 1, the first phase that I see coming up a lot. And that is that most people have a certain idea to what intuitive guidance needs to look like. They have a certain image in their mind of how they should receive intuitive guidance, whether that is through dreams, through sight, through visualizations, through meditation. People have in general an idea of what intuitive guidance and spiritual gifts need to look like. And that is partly because we see what it looks like for others, and partly because we already create an idea of what it needs to look like for ourselves. Now, why is that important to mention? Because when we do this, when we either compare or we create an idea of what it needs to look like, we create a certain expectation, and that expectation then creates an attachment to an outcome, because we create a certain attachment that creates value to what it needs to look like. If it looks like this, then it is intuition. If it looks like that, then it isn't. And if it does look like that, then it is valuable, and if it doesn't, then it's not. So we create an expectation, and from that expectation we put value on it, and then that value becomes the attachment to it. And then by feeding into that attachment, the attachment to the outcome becomes actually stronger. So what then can happen is intuition should look like XYZ. It doesn't look for me like XYZ, so perhaps I do not have the gift. Maybe I am not intuitive. While in that same moment, they are receiving a gut feeling or they have thrillings within their body. It just looks different for them. But it doesn't mean that they are not intuitive or that they are not receiving intuitive guidance. It just shows up very different. In that moment, because they created this expectation of what it needs to look like, they do not recognize their own intuition actually being pretty strong, just happening in a different way. Because one of the things that happens when we create expectations and when we have a certain attachment to outcome is that we are limiting ourselves. Because imagine there are an infinite possibilities of how intuitive guidance can show up, but we create a certain version of what it needs to look like. So our mind is limiting the possibilities for us because it needs to show up just like this, and everything that happens outside of it, the infinite possibilities, we no longer recognize. We are asking the infinite possibilities to fit inside a shape that we have decided on beforehand. And what is actually happening underneath the attachment is a version of control. Because an attachment is the ego's way of saying, I'm trying to manage something that perhaps is not manageable. And if this mechanism of having an attachment to outcome is active when it comes to intuitive gifts and spiritual guidance, then that could very much be active in other areas of life as well. So how do we transmute the attachment to outcomes? So we let go of the idea of what it needs to look like. We let go of the box that it needs to fit into. And that does not mean that we no longer want to be intuitive, that we no longer want to receive intuitive guidance. What it means is that we are no longer limiting ourselves. We are no longer trying to figure out beforehand what it needs to show up as. We are open to receive how it is supposed to arrive. And that is actually bringing me into number 2, which goes into trust and surrendering. Because most people, when they receive intuitive guidance, they think that they trust it, but when it then comes down to it, they are not acting upon it. So let me explain that a little bit deeper. So let's say you are receiving intuitive guidance, you get a gut feeling, or you have a visual, you receive a symbol, you are not pushing it away, you are noticing it, you are aware of it, you are trusting in that moment that you are actually receiving intuitive guidance. But then when the moment comes to act upon it, as in make a decision based on what you have received, you start to second guess yourself and you start to try to validate your inner wisdom, that your intuitive guidance, through outside validation by, for example, asking someone else for an opinion about it, or trying to validate it by yet receiving another sign or pulling another card, like trying to prove that whatever you have received is actually true. And what then happens is that what you initially trusted, all of a sudden you start to doubt. And you start to doubt if you received anything in the first place. And maybe it was just X, Y, Z. So your mind takes over and your mind tries to analyze and to rationalize whatever you have received from within. So you first want to prove that whatever you received is true, and then you are willing to act upon it. But each time that this is happening, what is actually happening underneath it is I do not trust myself enough to actually act upon what I have received. And that is exactly where trust and surrender is coming in, because trust and surrender are not the same. Trust is, I believe that what I have received is true. I believe that was my intuition. I believe that is real. But to surrender is actually to allow any outcome to come as it is, to not beforehand figure out what that needs to look like, and to not beforehand assign any meaning to it, to just let it flow as it is, and to allow yourself to act before your mind can actually make sense of it or sign off on it. So from that trust, you already act, and that is then surrender. So that also means that yes, you can believe that something is true, and yet you can still not be able to surrender to it. You are not allowing yourself to surrender to it, because to fully surrender means that you will have to take actions without having the guarantee of a certain outcome. And you see what this is coming back to. Just as with number 1, it is coming back to a form of control. But this time the form of control shows up as needing to have certainty before really moving, and that certainty then being proof of your intuitive guidance. The ego is saying, yeah, I can move, I can take action, but as soon as I'm sure, as soon as I have that certainty. But intuition doesn't work like that, because intuition is I first move, and then as a result, the certainty unfolds. Because the sureness is the result of moving without having certainty. So how to smooth this? Trust is not something that you first feel and then you act upon it. Trust is actually coming after you move based on your intuition. So to mute this is actually to flip it around. So what most people are doing is they are waiting for another sign to prove their intuition was right and then act upon it. And in the meantime, they are waiting. But if you turn this around, so you first surrender, you allow whatever outcome is meant to be to show up for you, then whatever shows up is then the result and is the certainty of, yes, that was my intuitive guidance, and then that trust is built. So it is this circle that it keeps coming back to. And every time you do, it becomes stronger. And your intuition will show up stronger for yourself. And it will actually grow because you have that self-trust more. And that then automatically means that each time you do, it's easier to surrender. So they are not the same, but yes, they are very intertwined. And then combining number 1 and number 2 together, we are then creating the root. Number 3 has to do with validation. So I have seen people that intellectually believe that they are intuitive, that they are still giving their power away. They are handing their intuition outwards. Intuition in itself already says it. It says intuition. It goes inwards. It's your inner voice. It is your inner knowledge. It goes within to the one self. That journey to the one self is the intuitive journey. But if we mostly approach intuition from the mind, then is actually more an outwards journey, because intuition is really not a talent or something that you lack or something that you have or you don't. We all biologically arrive with that intuition, but there is a relationship that we have with it. Your relationship with your intuition, basically with your own inner voice, with your own inner knowing, that relationship is something that you can strengthen and that you can work on. And that's what I meant in the beginning with the computer, is yes, we have all access to it, but our skill set of how to recognize it and how to work with it, that can be different. And when we try to approach this only via the mind and not with really feeling from within, in a way that is giving away our sovereignty, because that's what it comes down to, sovereignty. And are we willing to really claim our sovereignty or hand that over to someone else? And what that can look like is, for example, for your own intuition to only search for that in books, to only try to approach it via the mind, to only get readings, to only have that outwards validation of that your intuition is right. Because if you approach it that way, we gain a lot of knowledge and awareness, but we're not really feeling it from within. We are not embodying the intuition. And that doesn't mean that I think that we should not learn or that we should not do readings or sessions. Most of my work is based on that. But what I mean is that it always should guide us back to our own inner journey. That it should guide us back to our inner wisdom and our intuition, and that we feel into it with discernment self. That voice becomes then our validation. We can only be validated from within and not outwards. And yes, we are human consciousness. We are relational beings. So all the connections that we have are mirrors, and they reflect back to us what is ready to be unfolded. So in a way, it is really good to work with others, of course, because that can trigger that next step to go within. How do we then mute this? And that comes from that we are no longer asking for permission, but we are granting the permission. Below the question of outsourcing our own inner wisdom is a sense of, am I allowed to receive this? Am I capable of receiving this? It's a form of asking permission and validation and proof of what you have received. And again, that validation, that permission of something that is so internal can only be given from within as well. And only when we claim that and when we really give the permission and give the validation to ourselves is then when the shift happens. Because if we always try to get a yes from the outside to something that lives from within, we will always remain seeking. Coming back to the root that I mentioned in the beginning, like how are they all so rooted together? So what is then the root of attachment to outcome, inabilities to surrender, and outsourcing validation? Those are the three different phases. But what is underneath all of that is a form of control. A form of control over what guidance needs to look like. Control over needing security and certainty before action can happen. And the need for validation and permission to get that from outside before you can believe what is happening within. Is the core control? Yes and no, because there's something underneath this control. Because control is basically a side effect. It is the symptom that shows up. It's the behavior that shows up. What creates those symptoms is missing trust. You don't need to control anything when you trust the one source that you are trying to outsource. So it's coming back to trusting your own oneness and your own wholeness. And if you are in a season where you could use a mirror to reflect back your own oneness and your own inner wisdom back to you, that is exactly what I am holding space for in my private sessions, my one-to-one readings, through Akashic records, through astrology, and through light language. And you can find all of that in this link, and I will put that below as well. If this video resonated with you and if it helped you in any way, it would help me out a lot if you leave a comment below telling me what resonated for you, because that helps me and guides me to know what topics to further explore. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.